Hi, it's Shifra from Therapy Everywhere, and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Therapists. In this episode, we're in conversation with Amanda Grace, an addiction specialist who really has years of experience in the field and understands how difficult it can be when you want to start moderating your drinking. One of her main mottos is to meet clients who come through her door where they're at, which means that even if you're unsure of what is really causing a problem, if you feel like you need help, please don't hesitate to reach out today. If you or someone that you love is affected by substance abuse, then please make sure to check the resources below, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you today. I wanted to ask you initially a little bit about your background and what led you to specialize in addiction therapy. How did you get to the field?
Well, I started out in my bachelor's program working in domestic violence, and there's addiction with domestic violence, but that was my focus then. During my master's program, I had the opportunity to work in an outpatient drug and alcohol program, and that's where I was first introduced to working with addictions. And I really found it intriguing and challenging, so I along with my master's, got credentialed in addictions specialist and went on to work with adolescents and residential treatment with addictions and criminal problems. I went back to work at a behavioral hospital in inpatient drug and alcohol addiction. And after that, I did private practice where I've focused with anxiety, relationships, and addiction.
So we're going to sort of segue a little bit into high functioning alcoholism. I know that's like something that just from the website, it's a main sort of thing that you address. And I want to know what distinguishes it from other forms of alcohol dependency. What does high functioning alcoholism look like compared to, someone that is not high functioning?
Yeah, well, when someone's not high functioning, they tend to look into inpatient treatment programs. So I get calls from people that may come to me for anxiety and not even believe that alcohol is a problem because everything is going pretty good except they're kind of anxious. And so there's different ways to segue into how alcohol is uh, not helping their lives or interfering. So they're pretty high functioning, successful, and that's one approach. The other approach is that they're just not coping as well as they would want to, but they don't really want to change anything right now because they're pretty successful. So it's really kind of like exploring a little bit. Sometimes I really do have people that call me and say they just have to quit drinking or they want to figure out how to manage their drinking.
How
So there's many ways of getting there.
how often would you say that, people contact you and they call because they have an issue, let's say with anxiety, they're feeling low, and then you sort of uncover through the process that actually like alcohol dependency is a problem?
Probably about 40% of the time.
Wow.
And it can be with anxiety or relationships, or sometimes it's with career problems, problems at work.
Mm-hmm. And once
Eventually, because my style is to get to the root cause of things, eventually whatever addiction you have is it's going to come to the surface.
Right. What would you say, I guess, that the unique challenges then would be for people who are sort of high functioning, living their day-to-day life, but they've got this dependency on substances?
Well, usually when they're high functioning, they don't see it as a dependency.
Mm-hmm.
They see it as they have too many things. They have family, they have kids to do things with, they have a demanding career, they're not taking care of themselves the way they used to. They're just a lot of pressures. And yeah, they drink, but it's hard for them to see that that life could be better without drinking because it's their go-to for all ways to cope. It's always there in the background and it helps them socialize. It's a culture. I've heard people say it just makes things more fun. Cooking, cleaning. I'm like, well, describe the fun. So it really is sneaky. It hides out back.
Yeah. How do people usually respond, if they're not necessarily aware of the fact that it's an actual problem? Once that kind of is raised within therapy, are people susceptible to the idea? Are they open to the idea? Does it take time?
Oh, it depends on the person and the personality. We usually start peeling the layers and, just the kind of the motivational interviewing style, which is let's just talk about what's working, what's not. What do you think you could change? If I, sometimes people underreport their drinking, and I usually ask them if there's some drinking and I can sense that they don't really see it as a problem. I ask them if they're willing to look into, there's Rethinking Drinking, which is just a educational brochure on different levels of addiction and abuse, and you want to measure it. And it's really good. It's not very judgmental, and just try to raise people's awareness and see if they want to explore it. If they don't want to, we can work on all the other things. But if there's an addiction there, if there's alcohol there, it will always keep coming to the surface. It doesn't really stay hidden because it's the go-to coping. So if you try to put anything else in there, alcohol is the fastest and easiest. It doesn't really want to share.
Right. So,
Like anxiety coping skills don't want to share either.
yeah. So would you say that people sort of come in with misconceptions about what it means to be like dependent on alcohol? Do you think people don't actually know that that is sort of where the trajectory is going, or what would you say the misconceptions are that people have?
Well, I think it depends on their family background and
Mhm.
what their experience with alcohol is. Like, there's some people that have really grown up with severe alcoholics in their family. Lots of drama, violence, just really terrible. So they either don't want to drink at all, or their drinking it doesn't look like that. So there's really not a problem. Right.
Mm.
If they're high functioning, they won't see it as a problem
Right.
because they don't look like what they experience. Then there's the other people that grew up where nobody acted out, but there was alcohol with everything, very high functioning, and but alcohol was at every function, at everything they did, there was always alcohol, continues to be alcohol. So for them, it's pretty normalized. How much drinking is too much drinking? It's surprising what people will say. And then some people have a really high tolerance for alcohol, which creates a bigger problem for them because they can drink a lot without ever getting drunk and not really see it as dependence. But when they try to cut back, they're not very successful because the mind is somewhat addicted, but then the body is. But they don't experience the being drunk part. And then you have people in between. They know it's a problem, but they just want to manage it. I haven't seen that it's really successful managing alcohol if you have a long history with alcohol. I'm always willing to work with wherever the client wants to go. But truth always shows up what the truth is going to be for that client, whether they can manage it or if stopping is ideal. Like, I worked with a client in the last year where they've been cutting back, cutting back, cutting back, and we keep having conversations. And what it's turned out to be is, as long as alcohol is in their life, it can flare up again when life gets too stressful if they haven't learned enough other coping skills, because alcohol is a coping mechanism.
For sure. And I think also, I guess if people are coming from, let's say that they're in uh, good positions in their career and they feel as if they're
Oh yeah,
functioning, in a totally normal
why
way,
change it?
why would you question it? Yeah, it
Well,
does.
yeah, well, they don't want to ruin a good thing. Like they get really fearful, especially if alcohol is helping them cope with all of the stresses, which it will until it doesn't.
Right.
So there's a big risk at stopping. There's also a risk if you're high functioning alcoholic, you're really successful, and then if you have a partner who drinks, and if you decide that it's not working for you, and your partner isn't on board, that creates another stressor that sometimes people aren't ready to really look at, or they don't know what it's going to mean. A lot of people, another misconception to go back to that is a lot of people think when you get into treatment, everybody's going to be up in your business. It will be like AA. It will require tons and they don't have the time. But I really don't work that way. You just start with where people are at. I think less is more.
Mm.
That if you can't reinvent the wheel. You have to just figure out what it's doing and slowly incorporate other things, other ways of managing. And sometimes things don't work right away, or you two steps forward, one step back. It's a journey. It's not one and done.
That leads me sort of into asking you about what the treatment process would look like. Obviously, every person is different,
Oh
but
yeah,
how would you say how would you say it looks for somebody who's coming in who, has an issue? Maybe they're a little bit aware of their drinking, but they don't know how big of a problem it is, but they come to you and they
yeah.
realize, okay, I need to get help with this dependency that I have. What does the scope of that look like?
Well, if they really come in with I'm dependent on alcohol, we'll start there. A lot of times they come in with other things and then we get to that place. But if they come in with a dependency, then we have to figure out, well, where are you dependent? How do you use alcohol? Or how many places is in your life? Some people just binge drink, which they don't think is a problem, or it's everywhere for everything. And then we also have to look at, do you have any other ways of relaxing, of de-stressing, decompressing, so we have to assess all of that. Where are they at? And then realistically, what is their first goal? What do they want to do? It usually isn't, I rarely hear, oh, I just want to stop. It's really, I just want to manage it. Okay, well, what does managing look like? And we just start there. And it's like peeling an onion. And it really is. Everybody's story is unique and their backgrounds and their personalities. And it's a matter of staying in tune with that client and helping them and them helping me figure out how they can get their life back. And then choosing alcohol is different than just having it be your go-to.
Right. I guess sometimes the topic of like alcohol, substance abuse, any kind of dependency can kind of bring people into that space of feeling maybe like a little bit of shame or a little bit like it's taboo
Yeah.
or something like that. So what would you say, I guess, to somebody who kind of suspects that they need help? But it's very hard also even to get to the place where you even have the thought that you need help. A lot of times I think it's human nature to kind of be like, I'm okay, it's gonna be fine. I'm working through it. But
Right. Right.
would
Right.
you say like would you say to people who aren't sure about it, they're on sort of like the edge, they're not sure if they should actually reach out for help or not, what would you recommend? How would you recommend that
Well,
they kind of
if
think it through?
they were to call me, let's say they were to call me, and I hear that often, let's just start with where you're at. Something's bothering you. You
Yeah.
called me. It doesn't have to be zeroing in on alcohol and fixing all of that. There's plenty of other issues in your life that we can talk about. And I'd rather ease into it and create trust and comfort. And then they can find out if they really want to explore that or not.
Right. I
That's
think
really my approach.
Also, let's say if somebody's watching this video now, it's either because they're
Yeah,
interested in alcohol dependency, or
yeah,
there's something in the back of their head saying, maybe I have a problem, maybe I need to learn a bit more about this. So I would say
yeah.
that if someone
Oh,
is
let's
listening to
go.
this and they have that little thought, it's really important to sort of reach out and try and get the help that you need, because it is available. And I think also a
Absolutely.
lot of times, like friends and family and loved ones and things like that can be people who, like, a really good support system. Those are people's support system. So how would you say that people, could support a loved one? Let's say they think that they have a problem and they haven't brought it up yet, or they're in treatment and they need, this is like a two-part question. First of all, if they're, concerned about somebody and they think they need help. And the second part is, if they're already getting the help, what can they do to support the person that they love?
Okay, let's start with the first one. I think that people, when they think their friends and family need help, that they talk a lot and they really try to convince that person because they're really concerned of taking some steps. It can be more helpful to learn about addiction yourself. Go to a support group, maybe go to counseling. It's probably affecting you in a negative way, and you don't quite know what to do. So you can start with yourself and get some and learn all about addiction and get some counseling and then learn about boundaries, because people that are addicted usually have other people in their life that makes it easy for them to be dependent. And I've worked with lots of clients who have family members who are dependent, and it just goes hand in hand that you want to be helpful, and you don't see that it's a boundary thing because you don't want your person to fail. And yeah, so raising your self-awareness, getting your own support, and setting boundaries where you support the person, not the addiction. Get your own support, get your own counseling, because usually when someone is addicted, they become the identified problem, but it's always a family problem.
Mhm. Yeah, I've heard a lot, like addiction is a family illness. Like that's kind of the thing
Yes.
to say, because not only, are there like genetics involved and nature and nurture and all those things. Also, if one person in the family has an addiction, it kind of domino effects onto everybody else. Even if you are not
Everybody
the
else.
addict yourself,
It
there's
dominates the
ways of
relationship.
control. Right. I think also there's something to be said about someone needs to want the help themselves. There's only so much that you can do. Sometimes you have to let go of the idea of like being able to control the situation. If you go to somebody and you say, I think you need help, that's almost as much as you can do. You can't force somebody into it. If you
Well,
do, it probably won't be effective.
it's
um,
not effective. I've had family members pay for counseling. It's probably the least effective thing. It's hard to believe because the family member who has a problem keeps saying, "I really want help. I really want help," which may or may not be the truth. So they are like, "Well, we'll pay for it," and then they come, but they don't have a dog in the fight. I mean, and then I think it promotes more guilt, but it tends to they tend not to stay. There's just not enough of a buy-in. So, and then sometimes it's interesting. The more the family member gets upset and is emotional and is more concerned about the addiction than the person that is struggling, that person that's struggling, they they're it's almost like they feel like they're doing all the emotional work, but it's the family members that's experiencing it. But the addict is real tired.
yeah,
And I said, what have you been doing? They've just been resisting. So
it's
I
so many
suggest to a lot
layers.
of family members, it's let them sit in the mess that they've created in their lives. Let them experience consequences and get out of the way and work with yourself. And that can be hard because there's a lot of interactions keep things going or not going.
There's a lot of people that look at addiction and I think they kind of think it's black and white. You either can get help for it and it will be successful,
That's
or
right.
you can't get help for it and you won't be successful. So with your experience, how what's your perspective on it, on recovery and how it works? And there are some people who, people will look at, even family members will look at and say, you're too far gone. I personally think that's, never a
No
good
one's too far gone.
thing
Yeah.
to put on somebody, because A, they'll believe it themselves, and B,
Right.
treatment is effective. And I think when people stop believing that they could say, oh, that will work for somebody, but I am too far gone. And I think that's, it's really problematic. I think people need to know that, like, no matter what kind of stage you're in, there's always a way back. So I kind of wanted to ask.
Yeah, there's always a way back, and there's different forms of treatment. I think a lot of people believe that AA is the only way, or there's some kind of a group thing. Almost everybody that I work with that calls me does not want to do AA.
Right.
They don't have to do AA. That isn't the supreme model. Different things work for different people. So you have to start with where you're at, and there is a point where if you're really addicted and you lost all choice and your life is rock bottom, that's a whole different avenue of choices than a high functioning person.
Right. I think that's so important to
Yeah,
say, for people to know, because I think it's so easy when you're the one who's struggling to kind of say, okay, my story is different, and everybody's story is different, but treatment
everybody's story is different.
to adapt to your needs, and to,
Right.
especially if the person who's conducting the treatment, and it sounds like you do this for your clients, you figure out what the problem is. I like how you kept saying, start from where you're at. Everybody's at a different place.
Yes.
Everybody's starting from somewhere else. So you have to kind of address and
Right.
pinpoint where somebody is, to then move forwards. And I
Right.
think
With
it's interesting with the AA kind of discussion that
Oh
you
yeah.
mentioned. There's so much
Yeah.
pushback, I think, a lot of times from people who swear by AA, that other methods don't work. We've been exploring on this podcast also, with Dr. Washington in some of our episodes, sort of like the other methods and other things that
Oh,
work.
there's so
And
many
for
other
him, it's
methods.
been decades of, working on a different approach, and it's been working so successfully for him.
So what happens with AA sometimes is that people stay sober and they work the program and they're really good at while they're in the program. And I have clients that once they leave the program, like they didn't get to the root causes. They stopped drinking, but they didn't do the rest of recovery, which is figuring out, why was it that you were drinking? What are you using it for? If you don't replace it, if you don't get new skills, if you don't heal, if you don't get your authentic connection with your authentic self, it's just waiting for you, and those issues will circle back around. And that's the way I work recovery. So there's no just one program. But with addiction comes a lot of shoulds, lots of shoulds. I should do this. I should want to go to AA. I should. So there's shoulding and guilting. So when you should all over yourself, lots of shame, shoulding on ourselves and others. There's lots of shame
Great
with that.
expression.
Yes, it is. So when we have shoulds for other people, and family members have shoulds for the person who has an addiction problem, it just fuels anger, because you're externally focused. You're not focused on yourself. You're focused externally on something you can't change, you have no power over. And so it keeps the anger going. But when we should on ourselves, no one wants to move towards a should. It's very shaming. We have a list of what we should do. I don't know, that list can just be there a long time. And then when you finally do it, oh, what's the reward? Because you already should have done it.
What happens if
It's
you
just,
don't feel better? Exactly. It's like you have that on,
yes, I don't know
if
that you
only I get
do.
here. But then you get there and, you still haven't,
Yes,
you
yes,
still feel the
yes.
same.
Yeah, so you can eliminate the word should and you'll be better off. It's better to just be honest with where you're at. I really don't want to do it right now.
Mm.
I wish I wanted to. That doesn't create paralysis like shoulding on yourself does. When I worked in inpatient drug and alcohol, I had a group once about shoulds on yourself. And I had a group of people saying to me, if I didn't say should to myself, I wouldn't do anything. Well, then that tells you where you're really at. You're just motivated by shoulds and guilt, and yeah. So that's one of, like, to me, I get down to a root cause. There's a
Yeah,
lot of shame and guilt. You can stop the drinking all you want, but how are you going to handle that? How are you going to heal from that?
because it's coming from somewhere. The root source is
Yes,
something, and if it's not
right.
alcohol, maybe it would be something else. And there's so many
Well,
people.
a lot of weed, a lot of marijuana
Mhm.
dulls it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that kind of goes into the next question. How have you noticed, like, I guess over the years, I guess the change within the field, are more people coming for help? How does it look different than it did maybe even 10 years ago? What does it look like? How is the field sort of changing?
Um, I think there's more openness to many avenues to get there. It's less of it has to be just AA or you have to go inpatient. People in general are more open, but I also think they're more open because culturally, everyone's really stressed out. A
Yes,
lot of anxiety. And the last few years with all of the pandemic stuff, lots more drinking. A lot of people got into weekly or nightly wine drinking, and they found themselves after a year not really being able to cut back.
right.
So,
Especially because there's the loneliness aspect as well, especially during the
yeah,
pandemic. I think, that drew a lot of people, which makes a lot of sense.
yeah, it does. So it's situational, but it's created a more of a willingness to be open. I also think that some people really like Zoom counseling. It was never the standard, and it wasn't for me, but I have found with some people that it's really a better place for them, even if they're in town. It's just not quite as intense. It doesn't feel
Right.
there's like a little bit of a barrier, and they like that.
They can open
It
up
just
and
makes
be
it
more,
safer.
more
Yeah.
comfortable. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that really changed the scope of what therapies in general looked like. Like the
It is.
last few years has really changed it. I think it's also driven more people to get help because they feel like
I think it
they can have
has.
a
And so,
therapist, across the world. And
yeah.
you know,
And then
it
I think as therapists, we have to be open and flexible and adjust.
yeah,
Because I still have conversations with therapists that are like, they're not going to do, they're not going to do Zoom. And I'm like, well, I think in person is ideal, but I just go with what works.
yeah. And I
Right.
guess
You have to
it'll
be
also
open and
change.
flexible.
In 5 years from now, it'll probably look different than it does today.
Probably. Yeah. As our culture changes, people change, stressors change, options change. And my clients, I just keep learning from them.
Right. What would you say is something that you've kind of learned that you take with you into your therapeutic like strategies, I guess, from your clients? And what's kind of like a main takeaway that you kind of have that's like your approach? I feel like start from where you're at is going to be my motto now. But
Yes.
other than that, what would you say you've taken from, I guess, what you've learned from the people who come into your practice?
It is start with where you're at. They're so hard on themselves that I think that self compassion goes a long ways, and reflecting that to them, it goes a long ways. And when I think that the wheels aren't turning and nothing is happening, there's always something happening. If they're in the conversation, it doesn't matter what I see, there's always something happening. There's always takeaways, and people change in surprising ways. And sometimes they'll come back and go, wow, that thing you said, and epiphany, and I don't even remember exactly what it was. But it's like it's their experience, and it's what is important to them. So I always, for me, is that motivates me to stay attuned to the client, always attuned.
I think that means also that if someone's showing up and doing the work, they
Yes.
making progress even if you can't feel it. It's like when you're learning an
Right.
instrument and you kind of sit there for ages and
Right.
you're playing that piano and you can't feel it, and then you look back
You,
months before and you're like,
yeah.
oh, actually, you know what, I'm getting a bit better, even if I
Right.
didn't feel it as I was going.
Even
um
if they don't do any of the homework. So
yeah,
some
they're
people
still
like
showing up and doing it
lots of,
more than they were before.
right. Some people like lots of worksheets and homeworks, and other people don't. But I'm always surprised at that. It's like, no, you turned down everything, but yet, wow, you're making better choices. You're absorbing something. It's working. And then I don't know how necessary I was to the process sometimes.
No, I'm sure that gives the it gives the space for people to come and make the change.
Yes,
My
absolutely.
my brother, like every time I tell him I want to get better at working out, he's like, well, if you
Yeah.
did more today than you were gonna do, basically doing something is better than doing nothing. And I think that's like
Oh,
just a
yeah.
thing to
Yeah.
live by. It's like even if you do the smallest step, you cool up, you say, I think I have a problem. Okay, maybe you don't get the help right there and then. You know the resources there, you
It's
know you can
still
come back
enough.
to it. You're taking a step. And I think
Yeah.
that's just important
That
to encourage people. You can always take a step. You can always also pause. You can take a step forwards, you can pause. Maybe you'll take a step back, but then you can
yes.
keep going.
So that's that self-acceptance piece, self-compassion, and that's where the shoulding gets in the way.
Right.
Because if I only did a little bit, it can never really count. But yet that's where you're at. So we talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
Self-compassion is pretty important. Self-forgiveness, self-compassion goes along with self-acceptance. It's really about that connection to your authentic self, because alcohol prevents that.
Mhm. So, for those who are listening, as we sort of wrap up the conversation, which
Yeah.
honestly I've really enjoyed,
Oh,
how can
thanks.
people find you, contact you for your services?
Well, they can go to my website, gracecounselingcos.com. They can give me a call, definitely. You want my phone number? 719-634-5613.
And I'll put all of the
Or
information in the description as well, so people can,
yeah,
reach
yeah.
out and find you.
They
And I
can
think,
they
it's
can
just really
text me.
important that
Yeah,
you're doing this work, um,
thanks.
and that you've been so open and like talking about the process, because I think that's helpful. I think people, need to know that it's not as daunting and scary as it may seem.
Because people really don't have any idea, or they've heard about it, and somebody's going to do a big long assessment and be all in their business, and it's really not my style, because that's what I mean. I start with where you're at. So you don't have to ask a lot of unnecessary questions. It depends on what your goal is. Things are more organic, I think, in therapy to be successful.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today, and
Yeah,
I hope
you're
to have
welcome.
you on
Enjoyed
again
it.
soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.